Good morning. It is a pleasure to be with you this morning and to officially welcome you to Austin, Texas. How many of you traveled from outside of Austin to get here today? Can I see those hands? Wow. Okay, great. Well, I have the privilege, starting in this past January, to be the chairman of the Austin Convention and Visitors Bureau, serving a 2-year term. So my job up here this morning, first and foremost, is to say when you are out in our fine city, when you're enjoying our restaurants, our bars, maybe have a team building exercise down on 6th Street, I want you to do one thing. I want you to pull out your wallet and I want you to spend, spend, spend. All right? Okay, great. So that's my first love. I've got another major passion and love, and that is talking to audiences and working with companies on building this thing called the customer experience. I grew up in a really small town on the border of North and South Carolina. My hometown is called Marshville, North Carolina. And when I was growing up there in the late 50s and the 60s, Marshville had 1,000 people. Today, Marshville has 1,000 people. Now, the fact that we chose asbestos as our growth industry probably had something to do with that. But we were just big enough that we had some very clear choices about how we spent our money. We had 2 mom-and-pop pharmacies, we had 2 mom-and-pop grocery stores, and we had 2 mom-and-pop hardware stores. And I remember even as a kid being very aware that one of these stores did decidedly more business than its counterpart. And that observation kind of put me on a lifetime journey of figuring out, how do you build relationships? As Dan said, how do you date? How do you marry? And then how do you stay married? Because that's what it's all about. Now today, based on Consential's SAMI survey project, I'm going to talk about customer experience and building the wow experience through the lens of surveying, because surveying can be a powerful tool in helping you figure out what you need to do to stay current with your customers and to keep them coming back and spending more and more with you. Now, we're going to have 3 parts of today's conversation. We're going to start with why, then we're going to talk about who's worth fighting for in regard to getting customers to come back, and then a little bit about shaping the path, what you can do as leaders in your organization to get everyone on the same team in regard to building a great customer experience. Has anyone ever gone on the internet and listened to some TED Talks? Anybody ever done that? I see some hands going up. Great. Okay, well, one of the top-rated TED Talks is a guy named Simon Sinek, and he wrote a book called Start With Why. He surmised in studying companies that those that really did well didn't start with what, they didn't start with how, but instead they started with why. Why are we in this business? Why does this, what is it about this business that makes our hearts sing? What makes us want to come to work every day and do more and more in regard to making our products and services the best they can be? What's that why? Now, one of the best examples that I can think of is a guy by the name of Samuel Pierpont Langley. Anybody ever heard of Samuel Pierpont Langley? Okay, here's the story. Back in the late 1800s, the technology, I say that with quotes, that everyone was kind of scoping out was flight, man-powered or putting themselves on a flying machine, if you will. The guy that everybody put money on, if you will, that was going to get there first was Samuel Pierpont Langley. And that was probably a good bet, because Samuel Pierpont Langley was very well connected. He was the secretary of the Smithsonian. He taught mathematics at the U.S. Naval Academy. He had friends in very high places. Andrew Carnegie was a friend of his. Alexander Graham Bell was a friend of his. The War Department gave him a $50,000 grant, which back in the early 1900s, $50,000 was a lot of money. It allowed Langley to go out and put a team together of the best minds literally in the world to try to figure out how to make a flying machine. But Langley was a little short on the why. He was really focused on the what. And the what was, I want to be rich and I want to be famous. And this is how I'm going to get there. Now, this contraption that you see on the right, that is how he chose to launch these testable flying machines. And they failed one after another. The New York Times followed him everywhere, especially when he was doing testing, because they thought at any moment he's going to have a success and that he's going to be our leader. Now, the story changes. Several states away, we have Orville and Wilbur Wright. No money, no connections, no team of people that had any kind of college degree. But these guys were passionate about having a flying machine. And they knew succinctly why, because they knew that it was going to change the course of mankind if they could make this happen. The meager money that they had to invest in their experiments came from their bicycle shop. And they had kind of this motley crew of men and women that were very dedicated to the project, but they didn't really have any. They had natural smarts, but no real education. And then comes that fateful day on December 17th, 1903, where Orville and Wilbur Wright launched at Kitty Hawk. That plane stayed up in the air for 59 seconds. It was 129 feet up in the air. And it went only as fast as a jog. But that was all it took for them to be first and to begin to do even more experimentation. Just to show you how passionate they were about experimentation, well before they were successful, every time they went out, they took 5 sets of parts, because they knew we're going to be out here all day and we don't expect, we know we're going to fail a lot. So here's the sets of parts that we're going to use again and again and again. Now, just to show you the difference between the Wright brothers and Langley, when Langley heard of the Wright brothers' success, if he had really been passionate about flying and not just the fame and the fortune, he would have probably said, okay, here's what they did. Now, what can I do to enhance that? But you think he did that? No. He took his toys and went home in shame. And he lived kind of in isolation for the rest of his years. So I share this point with you. Think strongly and deeply about why you're in the business you're in. Because we're going to need that passion. We're going to need that deep down soul searching when things get tough. And they will get tough as we get better and better. We know from research that there's only a small amount of customers that are going to outwardly complain. typically the people that have complaints that we can learn the most from, they're not going to just step up and tell you. We've got a responsibility to go out there, get the information, query them, and understand what their complaints and needs are. And that's what's so wonderful about the SAMI product, because it allows us to do that. I work with a lot of business-to-business companies, and sometimes I see, and I know it's probably not happening in here, but sometimes I see a real divorce between we are B2B and Amazon, Zappos, Apple is B2C. So there's a feeling oftentimes in groups that I work with that say, you know, I know those are really well-constructed companies. They deliver amazing customer experiences, but that's not really what we do. Well, here's the thing you need to understand. Your customers are dealing with Zappos. They are dealing with Amazon. They're dealing with Apple. And they know what excellent service looks like. And I've seen this again and again on research projects. They say, if they can do it, why can't you? Anybody see the article last week in the Wall Street Journal about Best Buy? Here's an article that says, can this former clerk save Best Buy? And we all know Best Buy's been in trouble, all right? Think about it. Of their $50 billion in sales that they're shooting for with their shareholders, 90% of that is driven by retail. And they've been in the tank. Now, this guy, Sean Score, that's on the marketplace section of the Wall Street, I love this guy. This guy has been with Best Buy for 27 years. He started out selling VCRs with Best Buy in North Dakota. He's now Senior VP of Best Buy. This poor guy has gone through 3 CEOs in a year. Can you imagine what that feels like? But here's the lesson, and this is why I want to connect back to SAMI and what we're doing with that great software. This guy, it said in the article, keeps a white 3-ring binder on his desk. And they are tabbed. And in those tabs are what they know about the customer pain points and why customers are leaving Best Buy empty-handed. And he said in the article, it's not going to happen overnight, but we're on it. We know what we need to do to provide a better customer experience. We know that we've got to train our salespeople so they know more. We know that we've got to work on staff attrition. So what I want to say is think tactically and strategically about your pain points. What are the top 5? What are the top 10? And what are you doing to make that better? Jeff Bezos is a real hero of mine. And I love it. What I love about him, he thinks differently. That sounds like an Apple slogan, I know, but Jeff Bezos thinks differently too. And when I followed Mr. Bezos, what I've heard about his philosophy time and time again, he says, you know what? Other companies are always looking for the next big thing. And he said, you know what? We don't spend any time thinking about the next big thing. What we try to focus on is, what is it about the customer experience that's never going to change? And how can we get better and better with that? Now think about it. Applying that philosophy, Jeff Bezos. When someone goes on Amazon, we're always going to have to place an order, correct? So what did he do with his team? He's come up with that innovative one-click ordering process. How many use that? Anybody in here use that? Me too. Me too. It is so easy. It's like a hot knife going through butter in regard to placing your order. Well, that's an example of Bezos and his team thinking, now what's not going to change? And how can we make it easy? How can we make it better? There's a great book that I read in 1985 that is still a classic, and the book's called Value Migration, and it's written by Adrian Slosky. And if you read that book today, it's a classic. The same concepts that were in 1985 apply now. And the whole context of the book is simply that value migrates. And what gave us a delivery of a great customer experience today, there may be something more that needs to be done tomorrow. With that in mind, here were 3 key questions that he pointed out. He said, what are my customers no longer interested in? My historical abilities to do what? I mean, what are we wasting insight and time on that they're done with? They don't care about anymore. What do they really care about? And here's the $10,000 question. What are they willing to pay a premium for? Think about that. In your architecture business, in engineering, in construction, what are your customers willing to pay a premium for? Because that's where the home runs can happen. Let me tell you about my friend Bruce Wolpert. I met Bruce at a Inc. magazine conference in the late 80s, and I have written about his company and him in all 3 of my books. That's how much I love him and his philosophy, and I believe he's got things figured out that others have not. Bruce Wolpert runs a family business that sells granite, all right? That commodity granite. Before coming back and running Granite Rock, which has been in his family for about 110 years now, Bruce finished first in his class in Stanford Business School. And from that, he went and ran a software division of a little company you might have heard of called Hewlett-Packard, all right? Then he came back to start running Granite Rock. They do RFPs, just like we all do in this room. They consistently win business with an RFP that is priced 6% above their competitor. Now, we all know how competitive RFPs are, don't we? Would you say 6% is a pretty nice upside margin there? How in the world does he and his team continually win RFPs with that much cushion? Well, Bruce and his group, going back to Jeff Bezos' thing, what doesn't change? What isn't going to change? And Bruce and his team started thinking, you know what? One of the pain points for our company or for our customers is they have to get their trucks and drivers off the road and into our facility to load that granite and then out again. Bruce measured, and he knew that it was taking the average truck and driver about 25 minutes to go in, load, and get out. And so they started thinking, what could we do to streamline that process? And what could we do to make this happen 24/7? So they don't have to just come during business hours, they could come anytime. They went out and they benchmarked, and this is going to surprise the heck out of you. They benchmarked against Wells Fargo. Now, why in the world would a Granite Rock benchmark against Wells Fargo? Here's why. They created a almost like ATM card that would allow any time of day that truck to come in their gates. And then they would pull up, swipe that ATM card again, and that granite would be leveled onto the flatbed of the truck. They started out with an ATM and ultimately cycled into radio frequency tags on the side of the truck. So once again, it was seamless in getting those trucks off the road and back on again. So when they went in and started doing their RFPs, they didn't just talk about the cost of the granite. They started talking about the client's transportation cost. What was it costing to hire those drivers? What was it costing in man-hour time to spend in the beginning 25 minutes, and now Granite Rock's got it down to 7. What does that translate to in regard to revenue, savings, and so forth? So the whole point is how we use surveying, how we use discussion across the table to really dig in to what our customers' pain points are. And oftentimes, they're not going to describe them exactly the way we're going to interpret. I mean, in Bruce Wolpert's case, do you think that their client said, we need an ATM system? No. But he knew the pain they had in regard to this excess time. All right, now let's talk for a moment about who's worth fighting for. When you're thinking about surveying and you're thinking about who am I needing to really carefully listen to, I want to say to you, all customers and clients are not created equal. That does not mean we give anybody subpar service. But the truth is, there are clients that contribute more to our bottom line than others. Now, I was doing a program for a Big Four accounting firm several years ago, and it was a region of a Big Four, and so I asked them to do this analysis for me. What did 20% of their clients represent in regard to net revenue? 92%. 10% represented 83%. And 3% drove 63% of the net revenue. Now let's ask ourselves, would we want to be paying very close attention to that 3% that's driving 63%? You better believe it. I mean, we need to be going deep with those folks. And who else has the lifetime value? I mean, you can do this kind of analysis based on not what they're spending with you now, but what you expect them to spend with you. But the truth of the matter is, the Pareto principle is more than alive and well when we're looking at these kind of numbers. So when you're thinking about your surveying plan, get out your list of clients and start with those with the highest net revenue and go down and see how deep into the list you've got to go to capture 20%. I think you'll be surprised how little it takes to get there. So we don't need to be thinking that that our survey strategies are the same or our research strategies are the same for all customers. There's some that are going to absolutely deserve more careful attention and probing. Here was a case study that I used in my first book. This was a company, it was a custom research company. They did research for businesses. And they sat around a conference table, the partners in this business sat around a conference table one day and said, you know what, we're not growing. We're doing everything we know to do, but we're not growing. So they decided to go into their client list and segment into these 4 quadrants, with the one most important would be high volume, high margin. When they did that, they found that out of 157 customers, only 10 delivered at that standard. So they started thinking, you know what? We've got some clients in here that just aren't really great fits for us. And we're spending a lot of time coddling those and probably not a lot on trying to move clients into this high volume, high margin quadrant. So here was the outcome of doing that analysis. In year one, they had 157 customers, generating about $11 million in revenue. That's their starting point. 10 years later, after doing that analysis and starting to get much more selective about who they recruited as clients, looking carefully at their, are they switchers by nature? Because that's not anybody we want to bring in. Are they bottom feeders on price? That's not anybody we want to bring in. So in year 10, 78 customers, $30 million in revenue. So look, half the customers, 3 times the revenue. So that's just a flag I want to place with you when you're thinking about surveying and when you're thinking about spending time collecting insight. Think about, first of all, who's worth fighting for. All right, now we're going to talk for a few minutes about this whole concept called shape the path. Has anybody read the book Switch by the Heath brothers? I see a couple hands going up. Well, this term, shape the path, I kind of creatively borrowed from the Heath brothers. But I've recommended their book so much, I don't think they would really, hopefully not care. But I love the phrase, shape the path. So here's the question I have for you this morning. Everybody in this room is a leader. So how are we as leaders going to carry the torch in regard to building this customer experience? How are we going to get silos within your company working together on behalf of the customer? Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. Think about the insurance industry for a moment. And think about the journey of the customer. In the beginning, that customer or client, whether it's B2B or B2C, is going to have a new customer experience. We're going to nurture them and convince them that we're the company they should go for. Then, probably not soon after that, they're going to have a policy service experience. They're going to call in requesting information or reports or getting another bid on a different kind of insurance product, but they're going to have a service experience. Then, at some point, they're probably going to have a claim experience, all right? They've had an accident, there's been something happening in the company that they have to go and say, okay, we need you, we bought insurance, we need you to perform. And then finally, there's going to be a renewal experience. Now, there's a lot of touch points under each of these 4 banners, but to keep it simple this morning, I wanted you just to see the 4 steps. But the truth is, we need to understand under each of these 4 steps when the customer gets touched and how those touch points distinguish themselves. Some are more important than others, but we've got to understand where the moments of truth are in all 4 of these steps. Here's an example of a company that I've used for several years as a case study. This is Automation Control Systems, and this is a division of Honeywell. This company does $11 billion of business annually. And To keep it simple, what they sell are temperature gauges, for lack of a better explanation. But they do both business to business and business to consumer, but mainly business to business. What is remarkable about the case study I'm getting ready to show you is that Automation Control Systems had the presence of mind when they put in a new protocol that included surveying. They did a control group, and then they did a group of clients that were going to have benefit of the new processes. And then at the end of the period, they were going to compare the outcomes. So here's how, and I think, Sammy, you would be able to do the very same thing. At a particular trigger point in one of those phases of the customer journey, you're going to ask a customer to complete a survey, a very quick survey. If that survey rating falls below a certain threshold that you can program in to the actual software, then an automatic alert trigger happens. And with that alert trigger, it alerts the case team that's responsible for that particular client, and a case is officially opened, okay? And that's very important. It's not about simply getting it correct with the customer. It's about why did this happen and how can we prevent this from happening again. That's equally important. All right, so the case manager and the team work with the customer to resolve the issue, all right? And then the case is addressed to the customer's satisfaction, and they go back in and do the process work to remove this glitch, hopefully, from happening again. Now, what was the outcome when they did the control sale versus the clients that got this new protocol? Pretty stunning. The cancellations on contract renewal were 40% lower versus the control group. And they were able to preserve an estimated $40 million in contract revenue because these people weren't leaving. So I want to use this as a great example of what can be done with these trigger processes in regard to the survey, because it allows us, with people that aren't going to raise their hand and say, I'm not happy, to give you some feedback, and you then can get on it and then look in the processes and change what needs to be changed. There are two key questions that I think are going to be very important in your survey. That doesn't mean that these are the only two questions, but I wanted to give you two that I think are essential. How many people are familiar with the Net Promoter Score? I see some hands going up. Okay, Bain & Company, a gentleman named Fred Reichheld, has pioneered the Net Promoter Score. And basically the way it works, and Bain did lots of research across many different industries to come up with this. You've got promoters, and those are people that are giving you an 8 to a 10 on a satisfaction scale. And then you've got neutrals, and then you've got detractors. To get a Net Promoter Score, you take the number of people that are giving you an 8 or a 10 and subtract away those people that are giving you like a 1 to a 6. That's how you get the net score. And companies like GE, Ford, a lot of the best-in-class blue chips are using this. One caution here, it's not enough to know what the score is. You then got to dig deep and figure out what's driving the score. You know, why did all those detractors give you those low scores? Why did those promoters give you all those high scores? So it's not about just the Net Promoter Score itself. You've got to dig more into the details. Now, that's a recommendation question. There's a second question that I think is equally as important. And here's one paraphrase of that. As a result of your last experience, would you make us the first choice for business again in the future? So we're asking recommendation on the top question. We're asking for buying behavior on the second question. And I think that's where you get a great combination, recommendation and buying behavior. And once again, on this question, number 2, you've got to go deep to understand if they say you're not a first choice, why not? What happened? That's how we all get smarter. All right, I want to give you a few more tips on using surveying metrics because it's not only doing surveys, but the worst thing in the world, and I see this a lot, you do a survey and then nobody knows about it. The staff doesn't know. The clients don't know. And again, Wes Clark, who's one of Granite Rock's VPs, he says, you don't stress a negative, you chart it, all right? Now, this is my friend Jean Bliss that has used this for years when she was in industry. And she actually created what they call a customer room, all right? That charts and metrics would get posted in regard to each of the customer journey stages. Learn, get, pay, buy, use, service. And so metrics affecting each of these areas would be posted. And Jean would periodically take senior management through this room and say, okay, here's where we are, here's what's happening, we're not doing so well in this area right now, that kind of thing. But it kept the metrics and the surveying very, very visible to people in the company. Years ago, I was doing work for Dell Computer, and they sent out this report for some major surveying that they had done with their clients. And the headline I'll never forget because I thought it was such a great capture of words. You talked, we listened. And explain how you're using the data to your customers. Identify actions you're taking. Use web seminars, video conferences, meetings to share the data. Because the data is no good if it's not shared and acted upon. And when the customer knows how the data is being used, they're much more willing to participate. Dan had asked me, he said, now Jill, I don't want you to get in the weeds, but I do want you to give my group where they can go for more detail. And I went and did a web search, and this is a great company. There is a white paper called 7 Steps to Highly Successful Surveys. Go on the web and download that because it's a nice piece of work that gives you even more detail in regard to this material. Okay. So, let me end with one of my favorite customer satisfaction stories. What if you hired a national moving company to move all your belongings halfway across the country, and the moving company loses the truck, the driver, and all of your belongings for 3 months? How would you feel about that? Probably stunned, correct? Well, that's exactly what happened when Bob Leone in the 80s moved from Michigan down to Austin to live. And I heard about his experience through some mutual friends. So I interviewed Bob about the story. Bob took the moving company to court, and he got everything he asked for with one exception. He asked for a written letter of apology from the moving company president, it never came. So what do you think Bob Leone started doing? He started exhibiting the classic symptoms of a dissatisfied customer. Because you see, Bob Leone is Dr. Robert Leone that taught introductory marketing classes at the University of Texas. So like clockwork, Dr. Leone would start his lecture series every semester with this story. Now think about this strategically for a moment. You've got all these would-be young whippersnappers that are going to go out in the world and turn it on, and they're going to need a moving company a number of times throughout their career. But Bob Leone didn't stop there. Every year at Christmas, he would send a greeting card to the president of the moving company, giving that president a running total of the number of people he had shared his experience with. This went on for 10 years. Dr. Leone was a tenacious man. And he ended it after 10 years because this president was stepping down. And I think on the final card, it was something like 5,550 people, let's say. But I want you just to imagine in these bright minds of yours, what could Bob Leone unleash today with social media? If he had that much creativity in the 80s, just think what a Bob Leone could do today. So it has never, never been more important that we have survey tools, that we have research tools, that we are continually soliciting our customers and saying, what's one thing we could do better? That's the holy grail. And I want to tell you, at times, it's going to be hard. You're going to get feedback and you're going to go, oh my goodness, what the heck am I going to do with all this? We just can't seem to get it right. That's where your passion comes back in. Take a moment, think about, why am I in this business? What is it that really works for me about this business? Take a deep breath and step forward. It's been a pleasure to be with you this morning, and go out in Austin in the next several days and spin, spin, spin. All right, thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions. Anybody got a question? We've got time. Yes. Hey, Kieran. Oh, man. There are many places. There are many places. There's a place called Him that has really nice designer jeans right on Lamar. But there's not a boutique in town that's not going to have great jeans. All right? Right. Good. I love that question. Love that question. I didn't even know I knew the answer to that question. Okay, yes. Okay, let me go back up. Thank you for wanting to know that. That's a good thing. Use web seminars, video conferences, meetings to share data. Yeah, and think about the impact on some of your best customers. When you bring them together and say, we've done all this research, we want to get your input. This is what we think we're learning. Do you agree with this? Because we're thinking we're going to invest in this area. Do you agree? I know in talking to Dan, the way the SAMI survey came about was users said they wanted it. And good for you. Yes. Okay. Okay, very good question. How often do you survey, and how much time would you expect someone to involve themselves with a survey? First thing is, you don't need to over-survey. There's this thing called survey fatigue, and people just turn off. So I would say, my guess would be maybe twice a year would be pretty much the maximum I would think about. But also think about that buying center. You got the decision maker, you got the gatekeeper, you've got the user. You can spread that out as well and then bring that 360-degree profile together. I've seen research that shows the more questions you add, the more fall off you get, that people just abandon the survey. So I would be really, really careful about that. Here's what I'd rather see you do. Have 5 key questions. And if there is additional information you want to collect, ask to call them or call them and get that. Also, I've seen some really good surveys where they say, if you mark no on something, could we have a representative call you? That kind of thing. So I would let the survey itself be brief and then know that you can go in for deeper information, even one-on-one. I think one-on-one's a great way to do it. Good question, yes. What I see done well is when a score falls below, that is a good place to ask for additional information. But then someone would also argue, and I can see it, if it's really good, what drove that too? All right, so the jury's a little bit mixed there, but I'll tell you, I love open-ended questions. I think open-ended questions are the richness. And what you do with open-ended questions is you look for keywords, and then you start trending the results based on those keywords. But open ends are sometimes you can get you can get things that you wouldn't have imagined you could get. So I'm big on open ends. Just don't expect them to write a term paper, Anyone else? Because these were great questions. Okay, enjoy Austin, enjoy the conference. Bye.